Welcome to Defending Digital. I'm Chad Warner. Today's topic, how strong is your password? Learn password security. Start a conversation about digital security, and it won't be long before you're talking about passwords. Passwords are a part of daily life, yet very few people think about what makes a password strong to reduce the risk of its being cracked. Let's take the time to think through it now. The threats. 81% of hacking-related breaches used stolen and/or weak passwords, according to the book Cybersmart. 75% of people used the same password for multiple websites, and 30% used the same login info for all their online activities, according to the book Future Crimes. And I've previously reviewed those books. You can find them. There's podcast episodes about those, and you can also find blog posts at defendingdigital.com. It's practically inevitable that one or more of your passwords will be breached at some point, even if it's through no fault of yours. This reality has led to credential stuffing. That's when hackers take login credentials that they've acquired for one account and try them on other accounts, assuming that the owner has used the same login credentials for multiple accounts. Even if you use a password manager like Lastpass, which you should, you'll still need to remember a few passwords. You'll need to remember the passwords for your computer and phone and the master password for your password manager, at a minimum. Your kids need to remember these types of passwords, as well as any that they need to type at school if they can't use a password manager there. Because kids don't intuitively understand what makes a password strong, they often create weak passwords. They're also prone to reuse them because it's easier than remembering multiple passwords. So even if you use a password manager, it's still useful to know how to create strong passwords and to help your kids do so. And you can learn more about Lastpass, which I previously mentioned. That's at defendingdigital.com/go/LastPass. So how can you increase your security? You may be thinking, oh no, here comes boring password advice. Well, let me give you a shortcut. If you use a password manager like LastPass, which I just mentioned, or some others that I'm going to go through later, and if you have that password manager configured to generate strong passwords for you, you'll hardly ever need to create passwords yourself. However, as I said a couple minutes ago, you will still need to remember a few passwords, so let's see how to make them strong. Make passwords long. Longer is stronger. The most important thing you can do to increase a password's strength is to increase its length. Why? Each additional character makes it multiple times stronger. According to NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, quote, password length has been found to be a primary factor in characterizing password strength. Passwords that are too short yield to brute force attacks, as well as to dictionary attacks using words and commonly chosen passwords. End quote. Unfortunately, most accounts have limits on how many characters you can use in a password. I recommend using at least 15 characters. I use 20. The reformed hacker Kevin Mitnick recommends 20 to 25 characters. If an account says that you've used too many characters in your password, you can reduce the number until you reach the maximum that they allow. Make passwords complex. What do I mean by complex? I mean increase the variety of the characters in the password. Use all the character classes, uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols, which are special characters like the exclamation mark, the @ sign, the pound sign, the dollar sign. I recommend using all 4 classes in every password. If an account says you've used a disallowed character, just replace that character with one that is allowed. And then a few quotes about password complexity. From the Security Now podcast, episode 303, quote, we get our protection from the size of the space that we force the bad guy to search. The larger the space, that is, the greater the number of combinations of wrong passwords the attacker has to try during a brute force, try everything attack, the greater security we have, end quote. And from GRC's Password Haystacks page, quote, the use of every type of character forces the attacker to search through the largest possible space. So in essence, by deliberately using at least one of each type of character, we are forcing the attacker to search the largest possible password space because our password won't ever be found in any of the smaller spaces. End quote. And then another quote from episode 303 of that Security Now podcast, quote, making the alphabet as large as possible is also important. I use the example of just decimal. That's like the worst you could possibly do would be a digits-only password because each character only makes it 10 times stronger. Whereas, for example, if it was lowercase, each character makes it 26 times stronger because you've got an alphabet of 26. But if you put in even just one uppercase character, suddenly now that's radically stronger because the alphabet is lowercase 26 plus uppercase 26. which is to say, by putting in an uppercase character, you have made the attacker use brute forcing that includes uppercase, end quote. And then one more quote from that same podcast episode, quote, make the search as hard as possible. In addition to length, which clearly lengthens the search, if you absolutely want to use, you absolutely want to use at least one uppercase, one lowercase, one digit, and one symbol, because what you've done then is moved your password out of any of the abbreviated searches, end quote. Make passwords random. The more predictable your password is, the easier it is to break. Why? If someone is targeting you specifically, they may be able to learn enough about you to guess your password. For example, if you post on social media about your pet or your favorite sports team or your favorite book, a hacker may try those words. Now, if someone is cracking passwords in bulk, so you as well as anyone else, they will try guessing common predictable words. There are many dictionaries available that include not only common dictionary words, but also other words and phrases that are commonly used in passwords. For example, names of people or pets or of fictional characters. Password crackers often try multiple languages, so you're not safe to simply choose words from another language other than your primary language. Also, don't just tack numbers or special characters on the end, because that's a common pattern, and it's thus predictable. Instead, mix the numbers and special characters into the inside of the password. Another quote from episode 303 of the Security Now podcast, quote, as soon as the attacker has exhausted all of his lists, common password lists, maybe site-specific likely passwords based on the site they're trying to hack or the specific user, then they'll fall back to dictionaries. Then maybe dictionaries with a digit tacked on the end, because we know now that some password policies require at least one digit. Don't use simple character substitution. A common piece of password advice is to replace letters with numbers or special characters. For example, the word password becomes P, $, $, W, 0, RD. These are sometimes called leet-speak passwords or munged passwords. The reality is that password cracking applications have been able to recognize most character substitutions for years, and they're not fooled by this. Wired.com has an article, Secure Passwords Keep You Safer, which says, quote, Password Recovery Toolkit runs the dictionaries with common substitutions, $ for S, @ for A, 1 for L, and so on. Anything that's leet speak is included here, like 3 for E, end quote. Avast.com has an article, How to Create a Strong Password, which says, quote, avoid common substitutions. Password crackers are hip to the usual substitutions. Whether you use doorbell or D00RH377, the brute force attacker will crack it with equal ease. These days, random character placement is much more effective than common leet-speak substitutions, end quote. The website intheblack.com has an article, Everything You've Been Told About Passwords is Wrong, where they say, quote, the problem is that today's hackers rarely start with a blank slate. Instead, they begin searching for English words plus common substitutions, such as $ for S. That makes them very well adapted to breaking exactly the kind of passwords users tend to create, end quote. And then CSOonline.com, in their article, Unraveling the Truth About the NIST's New Password Guidelines, says, quote, when asked to add special characters, they tend to make predictable substitutions, such as @ for A and ! for L. Because the substitutions are predictable, they can be guessed algorithmically with pretty good accuracy, end quote. Don't use a few predictable dictionary words. It's become a common practice for people to string together a few words. This became much more common after the 2011 XKCD comic 936, titled Password Strength. And you can see that comic in the blog post that goes along with this episode at defendingdigital.com. Now, you'll notice in the comic, it says you need to use random words. Most people don't. They just pick a few words that pop into their heads at the moment. For example, a person glances around the room and creates the password chair, lamp, window. That lack of randomness makes the passwords more predictable and weaker. If you use this method, be sure that the words are random. Computers are way better at being random, or pseudo-random, than humans, so use your password manager. Or you can use 1Password's online password generator, and I have a link to that in the blog post that goes along with this episode. Otherwise, it's onepassword.com/password-generator. If you choose memorable password there, it will generate a password made up of 4 words connected by hyphens. You can make it stronger by increasing the number of words and checking the box to capitalize a letter within it. In Security Now, episode 297, they said, quote, "You're going to be tempted to use non-random words in a sentence. And as soon as you do that, wham, the strength of what you have done just collapses." And in Security Now, episode 313, quote, "It is much easier to make a much stronger password of a certain length by adding, changing the case, and salting it with some special characters. I mean, even, for example, if you took correct horse battery staple and you just stuck dashes in between, or your own special joiner character that you didn't tell anyone about, that makes it radically stronger." End quote. Make passwords unique. Let's zoom out from thinking about each password in isolation. Consider your entire set of passwords and accounts. As we saw earlier, 75% of people use the same password for multiple websites, and 30% use the same login info for all their accounts. No matter how strong a password is, if it's one that you use for multiple accounts, you're at risk. What's the solution? Make passwords unique. Use a different password for every account. To do this, you need one of the following. 1, an incredible memory. 2, a secret, unpredictable password scheme. Or 3, a password manager. You know by now that I recommend the password manager. Most people do not have an incredible memory or a secret, unpredictable password scheme. Use a password manager. Now that you have a taste for what goes into making a password strong, I'm sure you'll agree that you don't want to think through all of these criteria every time you create a password. That's why I recommend that you use a password manager whenever possible. It's the most practical, most secure option for the average person. I've been using Lastpass for years, and I highly recommend it. I previously wrote about it and recorded an episode about it, about how Lastpass solves many password problems. And I've covered some of those here today. If you'd like to consider other password manager options, there's 1Password, Dashlane, Bitwarden, KeePass, and Password Safe. And you can find links to all of those in the blog post that goes along with this episode at defendingdigital.com. If you're interested in Lastpass, you can check it out at defendingdigital.com/go/Lastpass. Password managers let you control how they generate passwords. For example, Lastpass lets you set the following: password length, easy to say, which avoids numbers and special characters, easy to read, which avoids ambiguous characters like L, 1, O, and 0, all characters, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. You should set your password manager to follow the guidelines that we've talked through here today. Make the passwords as long, complex, and random as your accounts will accept. If an account rejects a password, then you can adjust the generated password to fit the requirements. But if you change the settings on your password generator, just make sure to set it back the next time you create a password so you're back to creating it as strongly as possible. Here's how I configure LastPass. Password length, 20. All characters, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. There will be passwords that you can't or don't want to put in your password manager. For example, the password manager or the master password to your password manager. You'll need a secure place to store those passwords. You can consider a sheet of paper or a notebook that's locked in a secure place in your house. If you have a fireproof safe, that's a good place. Test your password. Do you want to test the strength of a password? Password managers like LastPass will usually include a meter or rating to tell you how strong a password is. Also, there are many password tests, sometimes called password checkers or password meters, available. Some are helpful and others are outdated or misleading. You'll often get different results because they calculate password strength differently. Many password meters don't check for dictionary words and other common words, and we've seen that using such words in passwords makes them significantly weaker. You should look for a meter that checks for these. You should look for checkers from reputable sources. Look for ones that show how they work so that you can evaluate them. A good password test will not transmit what you type over the internet. The calculations on password strength are just happening right there in your browser on your own device. But if you are concerned, you can put in passwords that are similar to your password rather than your actual password. I like password checkers that are educational, that explain how they work and how to create strong passwords. Also, I recommend using one or more of these to teach your kids how to create strong passwords. And I have links to a few of my favorites in the blog post that goes along with this episode. There's Online Domain Tools Password Checker, This one tells how long it would take to crack your password and why. It also checks if your password is one of the 10,000 most frequently used and has an option to check for dictionary words. Then there's My One Login's password strength meter. This one also tells how long it would take to crack your password and why, and it also checks for dictionary words. Then there's the site How Secure Is My Password. This one tells how long to take to crack your password, also gives some tips and checks for dictionary words. And then there's GRC's Password Haystacks, which tells how long it would take to crack your password and why, shows search space calculations. It's very educational. And then Kaspersky has a password check that tells how long it would take to crack your password and also alerts to weaknesses within the password that you enter. And then Rumkin.com has a password strength test, which tells how long it would take to crack your password and why. And then it also checks for common passwords. This too is very educational. So what should you do? Step 1, use a password manager. Not only will it increase your security, it will make your life easier. I like Lastpass, and I've described some others above. 2, make your passwords long. Longer is stronger. Use at least 15 characters. 20 or more is better. 3, make your passwords complex. Use all 4 character classes: uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. 4, make your passwords random. Avoid predictable patterns. Avoid common words. Mix numbers or special characters into the inside of the password. 5, make your passwords unique. Use a different password for every account. 6, set your password manager to make passwords long, complex, and random. 7, teach your kids how to create strong passwords with and without a password manager. Play with a password checker to make these concepts easier to understand for them. I'd love it if you would take a minute to leave a rating and review in whatever app or site that you're using to listen to this podcast. Also, think of a friend who's interested in internet safety, security, and digital parenting, and tell them about this podcast. Thanks.